currently in Awakairangi, Lower Hutt. This is in the southernmost part of our North Island and is part of the Wellington city. And this is a really important place for us in terms of climate change. It's one of the most vulnerable areas to climate change in our country. We're set here against the background of an ambling river that wants to move through the landscape but currently can't. We're right near the ocean as well, and so things like sea level rise, storm surge are very real issues for us here in Te Awakairangi. Kia ora koutou, ko Maibritt, Pedersen, Zari, taku ingoa. Climate change is already affecting us in numerous ways in this part of the world, particularly a bit further north in the Pacific Island nations. Sea level rise is obviously a really big problem there, and I think that will continue to have a really big impact. We're actually filming on the day that the latest IPCC report has come out, and it's all over our news because this really affects us. And even though, particularly for our Pacifica cousins, they're not responsible for many emissions at all, they're bearing the brunt of those climate change impacts. So climate change is something which is already happening here. We talk about it in the present tense rather than in the future. The research that we're undertaking co-designs with communities urban design strategies that are centred in Indigenous ecological knowledges and nature-based solutions as a means to adapt to climate change impacts. We'll be working in 5 different places, 2 places in Aotearoa, one in our North Island, Te Ātea, and one in our South Island, Te Waiponamu. Specifically, we'll be working in Awakairangi in the North Island, which is where we are right now. We also will be looking at working with communities in Kiribati, Vanuatu and Samoa. And we'll be doing this in order to determine how to effectively forefront Indigenous knowledges and solutions that work with nature and urban design so that both urban and ecological well-being are simultaneously increased as a response to the impacts of climate change.
This is where your research is?
Yeah, it is. I'm researching the Y4C strain, which is over that way. And it's really interesting, and I think it lends into a lot of conversations about what we talk about in our stream, Te Ātea. I guess so far I've been looking a little bit at the history, but I'll be going into looking about artful ways to engage with sea level rise, and what that means in a New Zealand Aotearoa context. That kind of similar to you, Zach, in a way.
I think it's about asking people when they live in areas kind of what's most important to them, because I guess in a Aotearoa context everyone has this connection to the lands and the landscape that they're in, and especially for Indigenous Māori, we see our awa, our rivers and our whenua as kind of our tupuna, our ancestors. Like, they're not just these bodies of water, they're not just the land over there, they're actually connected deeply to us.
When we talk about resiliency, it's really important to focus on an understanding of where vulnerabilities may be and how we could support them in a meaningful, considerate way, in a considerate space. And that essentially means looking at what role Pākehā architects and Māori Indigenous architects can play in that.
The thing about Aotearoa that's particularly unique is its Indigenous population, particularly when it comes to climate change and to the way mātauranga Māori is applied and understands changes. Mātauranga Māori is quite often thinking about what it's leaving behind for its rangatahi 500 to 1,000 years into the future.
Kia ora tātou te whānau, kui haia puketapu taku ingoa, noko nei au, no te whanganui ātara me ona takiwa, ko Te Ātea o te iwi. So for those who need a translation, my name's Ihoa Puketapu. I'm from the local iwi in Wellington here. or one of Te Ātea. We're on top of one of our maunga or mountains, in particular this maunga Mātai Moana, which means gaze at the sea. We've seen longer summers, shorter winters, and the winters are a lot more wet, more than anything. On the low-lying areas, people's houses, businesses are getting flooded. 15 years we've been talking amongst our own people about how we're going to, rather than mitigate, but more so adapt to the changes. So this occupation up here is partly about a coastal retreat plan, finding land where we can occupy that's higher up. Well, I suppose the mātauranga Māori part is listening acutely to the knowledge base from the experience of our much older tupuna who went through their own issues when they were first trying to understand the secrets of this land. We're now having to do that again, but at a much faster pace.
So my research looks at the synergy of mātauranga Māori and Western science within the educational space, within educating people about the benefits of mātauranga Māori working with Western science and understanding our natural world and the interconnectedness of our people and our whenua. The mātauranga Māori aspect acknowledges how the Māori have grown up and lived with these features and understood how these features worked over a significant period of time, and so both worldviews offer a unique balance between knowledge.
I think why this topic is so important to me is designing spaces that are able to convey someone's identity within them. For Māori, we don't see that in our built environment in general. So how can we better design buildings to kind of showcase our identity and who we are as people? But in mātauranga Māori, there are practices that we have that a lot of whānau rely on. For example, the maramataka that is actually at threat because of climate change. Maramataka is pretty much the Māori lunar calendar. It offers us knowledge on whether or not which season's good to harvest, whether it's going out to climb moana in the ocean, or whether or not it's good to start doing all your crops.
The latest report from the IPCC is extremely sobering reading. I think the language and terminology they're using now is code red, and one of the other sobering terminologies is wartime speed preparation. And when you look at society, we're not really in a red alert mode. Mitigation basically means society gets off its addiction of consumerism crack and sort of tries its best to put itself into rehab, as it were.
We see the effects and we live with the effects, and that drives a certain sense of urgency. We inherently need to hurry up.
Everyone needs to kind of play their part. It's kind of all hands on deck from now.
I think that the world should really listen to our rangatahi, our young people of Aotearoa, and also of our Pacific Island neighbouring nations. We have a lot to offer the rest of the world in terms of how to work towards climate change solutions that incorporate Indigenous knowledge and Western science models.